Hello everybody, welcome to another Should You Pull video. We're talking about Roy Mustang today, who is the Flame Alchemist, one of the coolest units from Full Metal Alchemist, and he's somebody that I've pulled in every gacha that I possibly can pull him in, and I'm always impressed, always satisfied with getting him as a unit. So I'm definitely going to be pulling for him this week. I'll be pulling for him on stream, so you can check that out around 7 p.m. PST, depending on kind of how work goes that day. So I'll be online. Hope you can join me. So we're going to talk about all the pros and cons of Roy. We'll talk a little bit about some of the extra stuff that comes with him this week, and hopefully by the end of the video you'll be able to make your decision on whether or not you're going to be pulling for him too. Let's start by talking about some of the stuff that Roy does well, and we're going to go with durability first. I'll put up the card here so that you can see it, and we can see that there's not a lot of check marks. So basically, Roy's best chance at survival in this game is going to be his barrier and then AoE resistance. He gets a decent amount of AoE resistance through his passives and through his master ability, but then that barrier will be pretty key against anybody that doesn't dispel a barrier. Otherwise, he has a self-heal. It's the counter cure that you can get from the Devout sub job, and that's something I'm going to be experimenting with. It's not as reliable as those auto heals that we see some units with these days. And he also has Drain on his Black Mage sub. Now, I don't anticipate that being a big thing on auto PvP, but in manual PvP, that can actually be a pretty interesting spell. So definitely try that out in live PvP. Otherwise, he's just not going to be the most durable unit of all time. I mean, it really depends on your matchup, because the barrier is good. It's 35%, but it's all types of damage, and you know, he does get a decent amount of AoE resist, but still we're not looking at somebody that has, you know, a lot of courage, or you know, he has a re-raise or anything like that. If you have the zombie mask TMR from Halloween Ryu and you can give him re-raise, then that's definitely something to consider for him. You could also stack some slash and pierce resist with Roy, and it's not going to be like at an L levels of those resistances, but you know, those are his two strong points in terms of resistances. Let's move on to one of the highlights of Roy's kit, which is the amount of damage he can deal, and there's a lot of check marks here. So Roy has a very high magic stat. He's got multiple high mods on his skills, and he even has stuff like Fire Imperils and Spirit Imperils. Now, the thing about those Imperils is that they're after damage and they're on low mod skills, they're on sub jobs, etc. So the way that they're kind of built out in his kit, he's not likely to use them on auto nearly as much as his other skills, but it means that he's going to be very strong for PvE because he can lower those resistances, those you know, that spirit mod, and then you'll be able to deal more damage. Your whole team will be able to deal more damage. He has chaining, so that will help as well in PvE. I just don't think those things, they're on the kit, but they don't really scream PvP to me, again, unless you're playing in manual and you can choose what you're doing. So his spirit penetration is average. It's a good amount. It's the 40 and 8 that most people get, and he also has good magic resist penetration if you get his vision card. So basically he gets 20 from his gloves. You're always going to use his gloves, and then he gets 28 more from his vision card. So that puts him at 48 innately, and he gets 40 more from a TP skill. Now, if you have that TP skill on, you're all of a sudden looking at 88 magic resist penetration, which is a big deal, but that can be dispelled, that can wear off, and you might not want to use that TP skill depending on what kind of team you're actually building out. So that makes his vision card very important for his penetration. And there's also kind of limits the teams that you'll put him in, because the vision card is more limited than, say, a fire card for a fire team, although there are some synergies there as well. He also has a skill to convert his TP into extra damage. It's similar to Summer Helena. He can strip through Protect and Shell, which is great that it does both because it helps your allies out as well, but he does not have a barrier break. His chaining will increase his damage. It's going to increase his fire allies' damage, and it's going to make quick work of barriers, but you're still going to have that turn when you hit a barrier. Sure, you're breaking it with 3 hits, but you're also not dealing very much damage that turn, so that's something to keep in mind. All around, it looks like Roy's going to be able to deal a significant amount of damage. He gets Human Killer on his gloves, on the raid accessory that we get from the Full Metal Alchemist raid. He gets some bonuses from the vision card, some global exclusives. Basically, everything kind of stacks up for him to become a very powerful damage dealer with a lot of instant cast attacks. We can talk about utility next, and Roy's main utility is going to be his high accuracy paired with a 30% hit chance skill. So that's going to be plus 30% to hit. He can also reach 100% counter chance reduction with his gloves on as well as his TP skill. So with his gloves on, he gets 50% innately on his kit and then another 50% from the TP skill. His LB has a powerful healing down debuff, but it's just the one use, so it's not as reliable in guild battle after that match 1. But we do have other ways to do healing power down in fire, so that's not the biggest deal in the world. He also can restore his CT by killing units, so he can get up to 400 CT back with his job level 25 skill. The range on it is kind of awkward, but it's an AoE, a straight line AoE. So when it does line up, it's going to be pretty crazy when you can hit multiple people with a 200 times skill and then also go again very quickly. He also has the Black Mage starting levels of AP, which means AP management will not be a concern for Roy. And he also has access to the Devout subjob, which is just a utility gold mine in itself. It's a very interesting subjob because of the instant cast heal, and we most likely will see that in guild battle 2s when somebody starts off low in a fight. But these skills might actually come out in other fights, just because if he ever does run out of AP, his auto attack is strangely 1 range, which is actually better for all the supporting that he does. And he also has the ability to remove courage with any of his attacks once his TP skill is active. So this can be dispelled, but if you aren't facing a lot of courage users, you might actually have the choice to turn that off, because right now you might like the courage removal, you might really like the counter chance, because both Sephiroth and King Bradley have 80% counters, and you know, reflex always sucks. But if you're not looking for those two things specifically, you might be able to sneak in another buff for himself, like the Zombie Mask TMR, or maybe it's going to be Saros TMR, or maybe you want a team buff TMR like the Little Leela the Bold agility buff, and you can make room for that by turning this skill off. I'd be remiss not to talk about the cons of Roy Mustang, but before that, you made it this far in the video, so thank you in advance for liking and subscribing. You know, I gotta put the plug in somewhere, right? So okay, so let's talk about cons. So no barrier break would be the biggest single one for me, because while his counter chance reduction is really powerful against someone, say like Sephiroth has a barrier, so that's going to make it harder for Roy to break through and actually kill Sephiroth, which is what we really want him to do, because Sephiroth is going to very much kill Roy. That kind of ties into the next point, which is the lower survivability, the innate magic penetration being kind of low without the vision card. And yes, he has the TP skill, but there's a lot of pros and cons to that and how it actually works out. The other thing that I have to mention is that non-FF collab units are just really unlikely to get buffed. So our Nier units have never come back, Dragon Quest has never come back, although that's fairly recent. And you know, what's the chances that Full Metal Alchemist ever comes back? It's not 0, but we can already see that the mainline Final Fantasy collaborations get Master Ability 2s, they get Dream upgrades, all these types of things. So when you go and invest in a non-Final Fantasy unit, you have to be prepared that they just won't ever get buffs. And if you're not planning on using Roy like now, like you think, oh, I'll build him, like slow build him for the future, he loses a bit of value that way. The other thing I'll say about Roy is that he's got limited attack skills. So he has 4 attacks on his main kit on just the main job, and 2 of them are AoE, 2 of them are single target. The range on them is kind of weird. For some, they're straight lines. And then the 200 times modifier attacks are both 3 uses. So he could get through those hypothetically. I think it's enough to last for 2 guild battles, but you really don't want it to drag on. It's going to make him tougher to be a defense unit if you're going for a long-term sustain, like against a lot of defense. And that could be kind of tricky, although I really like the idea of putting him first in a defense party to kind of maybe scare off fire evade, and then maybe you don't build him for anti-evade, you build him for damage, and he takes on some other teams and really surprises them. I don't know, I'm just kind of theory crafting off the top of my head here, but that is something that you should consider. So for the comparison, I decided to put up a couple other glove units. I feel like it's a good comparison, and it's also some units that you might try to put together for a team if you were trying to build a glove team. So we can see here that Roy does pretty well in a lot of stats, particularly his agility is really good once his passive is equipped. His accuracy is obviously very high. That is boosted by a passive as well, as is his magic. Now, there is an option where you either take off the agility passive or you take off the accuracy passive, and what you put on instead is the devout passive for 15 spirit and 15 defense. And it's certainly something that I'll be testing out, but but right now I think this is the standard setup that you're going to run him with. We can see compared to Summer Helena and to Kefka that he does, you know, compare quite favorably in terms of just his magic stat, and you know, their HP is all very similar except for Kefka's a little bit higher, but where he really stands out is that accuracy over the other units. And while those two other units, you know, have lower accuracy, Helena does have a lot of 100% hits. So there's kind of a trade-off there. Now, Kefka has no 100% hits, and his accuracy is actually quite low. The only reason it looks higher there is because he has that 5-term hyper vitality buff from the Energist sub job, and otherwise that's why his agility is higher, his magic, his dexterity, those all get boosted through that passive, and then otherwise he goes down a little bit. But Kefka's got some other cool things going on that will really make him a unique unit. And that kind of leads me into a point that I wanted to make, that if you're going for Roy, I think that you should be prepared to go for Kefka as well. I think that they very much pair well together. Roy's VC is going to be very good for both. If you're not getting Roy but you're getting Kefka, you should still get Roy's VC, but I recommend that anybody going for Roy should plan out to get Kefka. That's how you're going to get the most out of Roy. Next, I'd like to talk about Roy's TMR. I actually think this is pretty interesting. So the ability can be used twice. It has a effect that allows you to take 20 AP off of a unit every time you hit them. So if you hit multiple units, you take 20 AP off of both of them. And if you manage to go twice, maybe you get quickened, then you could take 40 AP off a unit. So I think there's some really cheesy builds that you could have fun with where you strip your enemy of all of their AP and then they can't use any of their attacks. I also think the defense and the accuracy on this TMR are actually pretty good. So there's a fun build I'm thinking about where maybe I have defense stones and some magic stones for some power, and I'm able to stack a lot of defense. And the idea here is that we get lots of healing power up to take a, you know, benefit of the counter cure reaction ability. Now, I don't know if that's going to be the meta build or not, but that's something I'm going to be trying. And I think this TMR works really well for that because I think that Roy is going to be using his gloves and most likely an accessory. And there's a lot of good accessories that you might use with Roy. For example, the Alex ring comes to mind, but also we have the Full Metal Alchemist raid accessory, which gives 10 human killer and 15 initial AP to any Full Metal Alchemist unit. So the initial AP is good for Roy, but he already has a lot of initial AP. It's amazing for the other units, but the human killer is obviously very powerful. You also get 10 dark resistance and 10 light resistance when you equip this. So it's a really good, you know, item. And we also could look at some other budget options. I mean, now if you were around for the Nier collab, you could use the Pod 153, but otherwise something like the white cape is actually quite good with him. The silver rimmed spectacles give him some more spirit penetration, and then the gold anklet even just to start the match with more agility. So it gives you the ability to play around with some armor TMRs, some cloth armor TMRs. So if you wanted to use the Leela the Bold agility buff, if you wanted to do something with another armor TMR, but of course you could still use your zombie mask, your you know, your Hellenist TMR, whatever it is. There's lots of options for you here. We can also talk about Roy's gloves. They're must craft, they're must equip for him because they give that reaction block rate, the magic pen, and then also the human killer with them, as well as just magic attack. So there's really the option is which one do you want to build? And I think the magic is the priority because he already has good accuracy. If you want to build his accuracy, then you're better off just building with an accuracy item. So you build the magic version, and if you're somebody that can, you know, farm 2 of these, which would be me, I would then build an aim version as well. I don't think the crit one is going to be very relevant. He doesn't have any crit damage or crit rate, although his card does give him 25 crit rate. I still don't think that's going to be, you know, a focused build for him. So basically build a magic and an aim if possible, and if you have to choose just one, the magic's going to be better overall if you have another accuracy item. If you're a brand new player and you don't have any accuracy items, you don't have an Alexandrite ring, then maybe you would build an aim over a magic version. I think that might be the way to go, but for most players, you're building the magic version and you can feel pretty good about that. That brings us to the end of the video, and we're going to talk about whether or not you should be pulling for Roy. And I think there's a specific key, you know, demographic that's going to be pulling for this guy. Okay, the firemains, obviously, but if you're not a fireman, you still might want Roy. There's a really good opportunity here to build out a fire team that would consist of somebody like Roy, Kefka, and then Minwoo, who you can get from these selection quests. Now, for new players, doing the selection quests isn't just a slam dunk. It's not that easy, but it's something that you can do over time, and you can eventually get that Minwu. So I think Roy, Kefka, and Minwu will be a very strong team. King Mont will obviously be very strong in there as well. If you're a new player that just pulled Hio, so you could go Hio, Roy, and Kefka, that could also be a pretty fun team. I think there's a lot of opportunities here for people to build out their fire teams. And the other option might be if you want to build out a glove team, and then in that case, Roy will be a really good part of that team. Glove teams are a little bit niche right now, but eventually they will be quite interesting. So basically, if you've pulled any fire units recently, and if you plan to pull for Kefka, then yes, you should be pulling for Roy. However, if you're happy with Fire Evade, or maybe you're not keen on developing your fire units, then you should skip Roy. I think he's a very solid unit, and he's just not game breaking. There's a lot of good 100 cost units coming out. You're not going to miss Roy if you skip him, but if you get him, you have a good unit. I was talking to one of my guild mates, Isvar, who is a big fire player in War of the Visions and a very, very intelligent player, and he actually had some really great advice. So I figured, you know what, I'm actually going to share that in this video. So here's Isvar's advice for pulling Roy. So being an accurate unit counts for a lot in today's game. And just by the way, there are a lot of high accuracy units coming out. Reagan, the new Stern, there's lots of units that could fill this role as being a high accurate unit for your team. But as you say, considering everything we've just gotten and everything that's coming out, he's more of a narrow unit. He's a 90 cost in a sea of 100 cost bangers. So I'd say go in with your eyes open. If you go for him, commit to it. He'll perform for you, but don't go expecting him to be the cure to your Sephiroth woes or something. Before you pull a unit like Roy and you're not in that element, it helps to ask yourself, when and where am I actually going to use this guy? Do I see him fitting into one of my current teams? Do I have a cool idea that I want to do with them in the future? Am I planning to pull for any units that he synergizes with in the future? If you can't answer yes to any of those questions, then yeah, he's good, but he won't be good for you. So him plus Minwu is going to be an excellent wedge into a new fire for a new account. It's a bit hard to get those VCs off banner for fire, but you could get the silver memories eventually for Minwu, Roy, and Kefka, and that's going to be a really nice little starter team for new players. So thank you very much for that, Isvar. That's really good advice, and I think that if you're watching this video, you should really have a good idea whether or not you're going to be pulling for Roy. And I do want to mention that King Bradley is coming next week, and if we were just talking about pure value of a unit, like how good they are, then King Bradley's like way up. Like he is going to be like the next Sephiroth, which Sephiroth just came out, but that's the guy that you can just go get, and he's going to give you a good TMR. He's going to give you an amazing kit. He's going to give you like all the things that you kind of are looking for in a unit. But if you're looking for someone that's going to do a job for you and do it well, then Roy is your man. All right, that's going to be it from me, and I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you all soon in another video. I'll see you on the stream on Wednesday as well. So that's going to be around 7 p.m. PST. I'll be pulling for Roy. I'm going to be mega super fast building Roy as well, because any extra shards for him will just go into Mind Spheres for the other Full Metal Alchemist units. So it's kind of nice. I'll just be building them up as soon as possible, putting them into PvE teams, or PvP teams, sorry, and having some fun. So look forward to all that, and we'll see you all soon.